What's up, guys? This is Ray. So today's the 22nd of February 2017. So Pisces is going to be the sign that Mercury will be in starting on Saturday the 25th. I mentioned that in my weekly transit video I just posted the other day. I said I would go over what those mean. You can apply some of the symbolism of Mercury being in Pisces to natal or birth chart astrology as well as transits, and I will go on a tangent about the transits towards the end when Mercury will be in Pisces, which starts again on the 25th and then goes to the 13th of March. I was just watching other aspects play out and I was getting really worked up and I was anxious to talk about it. So, sorry if I seem like I have a little bit of a mental fog. That is a side effect of Mercury being in Pisces. And for whatever reason, just a side note, if anyone's curious, I've done my own journaling transits, and since Mercury is my key planet, and also, my mentality or my emotional complexes or whatever, and I've confirmed time and time again that for whatever reason, I feel transit events 2 to sometimes 3, it's usually 2 days, if not 3 days before they actually happen, for whatever reason. So since today is Wednesday, and Mercury will go into Pisces on Saturday, I'm already starting to feel the fog, the mental fog. And the fog is actually caused by Pisces being the fall or the detriment of Mercury. So Mercury is supposed to represent your mind, your rational thought. It's supposed to operate on what Sigmund Freud would call the reality principle, meaning that when you look at the foundations of the personality or the person in general, their psyche, they have the ID, which is the instinctive response to like hunger, sexual drive, aggression, that sort of thing, animalistic things, which would naturally be associated with not only Mars for the sexual aggression and your physical needs, but associate with the first house. The first house is associated with the ascendant, so the ID is a manifestation of the ascendant rising in a chart when we're looking at astropsychology influences. Then the ego is supposed to be the rational mind, like I was saying. So that's where Mercury is represented in Sigmund Freud's psychoanalysis. Then the superego is supposed to be the moral conscience, your feelings, your empathic abilities. So that would have direct ties to the moon, because that has to do with your feelings, and heavily influenced by water elements, obviously are on the frequency of empathic, compassionate sort of thing, instead of the logical spectrum, which is more of what personally I ride the frequency of, the mercurial frequencies. But anyway, so when Mercury is debilitated, weakened, compromised, or dysfunctional, ineffective, usually some sort of over-exaggerated psychological effects with the superego, meaning that somebody is more moralistic, they tend to be consumed by their feelings, and they confuse feelings for thoughts. If you look at social media, where you see a lot of people reacting irrationally and even neurotic, that is actually caused by some generational influences with Jupiter and Neptune, and then Neptune and Saturn, because Saturn, being the polarity of the moon, are apart with your moral judgments and you deciding right from wrong. It's more or less the cause and effect with your moral choices and judgments, because if you failed to make a proper decision or judgment with your conscience, your moon, you will face the repercussions, likely from an authority or some sort of social norms or structure that will then put you in check for failing to empathize and use your conscience to the facets in which the collective on a sociological level wants you to. So, while Mercury is debilitated, dysfunctional, or just not working the way it's supposed to. We're going to be having an overemphasis of people being consumed and acting out on their feelings instead of their logical, rational minds. And I'm trying not to jump into the transit thing. Let me look at my notes. Just being super thorough about this. Yeah, I just wrote down some associations with Mercury and Pisces. So this could be attributed to transits as well as natal astrology. So obviously it's immutable, so the mutable crux, which is Mercury, and the opposition, which is Neptune, and then obviously Mercury that's associated with Gemini as well, and the opposition being Jupiter. Those are the four mutable signs that, or the four mutable planets that can be obviously altered and mutate. That's the whole concept of mutable, the most out of any of the other archetypes or manifestations. And coincidentally, those all represent on a pathology level or a physical level the facets of the human brain, perception, and cognition. So everything starts in the mind. That's where ment comes from in Latin, is the mind, meaning that mind over matter. If you plant the ment or the idea, if the thought exists, the potential existence of the subject that is of that thought can then come into being. So that means that our brains are the origin of a lot of the physiological changes with our own health and bodies and our behavior obviously impacts more of a collective level, sociological level, our culture, the way that our offspring, absorb and develop their own behaviors. That's the concept with neuroplasticity, which means that your brain can actually mutate and change over time. That's been proven with neurological scans and studies through neuroscience in recent years. So not only do we have Mercury susceptible to neuroplasticity, it's also in a fall or detriment, making it weak. So it's even more susceptible. And then we're going to have obviously some grand crosses going on during this time frame while Mercury's in Pisces that will feed into that susceptible kind of ideations and the lack of clarity. So I'll just kind of read off this so I don't try to ease my way into the transit thing, because I know I want to and I'm doing that. So obviously Pisces is associated with the 12th house, associated with Neptune. Neptune's the polarity obviously of Mercury. It has to do with your subconscious mind. There's some key words that are associated with specifically Mercury and Pisces: intuitive, communication, imaginative, impressionable, gullible, deceptive, unfocused, that's that mental fog that I was talking about, difficulty with boundaries, confuses emotions with thoughts, I already mentioned that, is incompatible, it weakens Mercury's pathology, so that has to do with your neurological functions, your cognitive capacity, your perception, your rational frontal cortex to make logical decisions. Your sensory adaptation is also affected, and then it slows down the efficiency of Mercury. So that can manifest on a individual level and a sociological level as well. So Mercury on a mundane level would represent like third house, transportation, immediate environment, neighborhoods, that sort of thing, traffic, communications, broadcasting, word of mouth, publications. So Mercury being in Pisces is like the personification of Mercury being retrograde in the worst way without it being retrograde. Could you imagine if Mercury was retrograde in Pisces? Maybe it would be so messed up that it would actually cancel each other out like a double negative and it would function. Wouldn't that be funny? I don't think so, but you could dream, right? That's a Piscean thing. But so the detriment would be counterproductive, unharmonious, conflicting, malefic, and unfavorable. So keywords that are associated with Pisces specifically is compassionate, impressionable, receptive, dreamer, mystic, confusion, elusive, transcendent, union, self-evasive, malleable. Hard aspects to Mercury being in Pisces. Transit or natal will overwhelm or defeat Mercury in Pisces by the other aspecting planet or chart point. So when I look at a square or an opposition, usually squares is the first thing I think of, but like squares and oppositions can translate the same way. I think of like a battle royale going on between the two planets that are in hard aspect together. And so I think of the dignity, which is the strength mode or, function of a planet in a certain sign, and the elemental balance of each of those. And who would I bet my money on who would win? Mercury in Pisces is such a lost cause. I hate to say it like that for people that are born with Mercury and Pisces in their chart. I'm sure you're great intuitives and empaths and everything, but in this case scenario, every other planet, except for maybe the nodes, node points because they're retrograde right now, is going to kick Mercury's ass. It's because of this Pisces thing. So, and it gets even worse because we're in the mutable years. We're already having a lot of challenging personality conflicts. That's another, theory from Sigmund Freud of conflicting morals, behavior, and logic and reason. If the behavior contradicts the moral ethics or the feelings, and then the logic rational mind tries to step in and rationalize the behavior that goes against what they think is right or wrong. So Mercury's already being challenged regularly, and now it's at its weakest moment. Mercury in Pisces being trine or sextile or conjunct would cause a significant inebriated kind of sense. The fog, the mind fog, would get even more intense, more distortion to infect the aspects with increasing severity of foggy mentality. So somebody who's really inebriated or drunk, or if you've ever gone to, like I've been to, all night music parties and festivals, you're leaving and you're just looking for your friends or whatever else. See like that inebriated person that's just walking around that has no idea where they are, may not even know what their name is anymore, and they just look like you don't even know how they're even moving. And funny thing as well, Mercury has to do with the neurological system, as well as the sensation of sending nerve messages to your limbs and your muscles. So that will also be affected, meaning coordination will also be affected. Archetype keywords, vague. Look, I'm gonna fucking beat you. Stop. Jesus. Vague. Lacking focus. So a lot of these seem like they're going to be reiterated. I'm just going to make sure I'm very thorough and go over this, because Pisces, a lot of things get lost in translation because their communication skills is not really there. That's the whole, them being more of intuitive and feeling vibes and stuff, because they don't have the capacity to articulate themselves. That's the whole concept of it being a fall or detriment with Mercury and Pisces. Lacking focus, psychic sponges. That's the Neptune influence. Unassertive personality, timid. They tend to have the victim complex as well. If you think of, just for, symbology purposes, the archetype of Jesus, or, sorry, the person Jesus, don't want to offend anyone, he always mentioned the two fish, and he turns water into wine, which I find really funny because Pisces is associated with drugs and alcohol, and I find it hilarious that the Piscean archetype in the Bible turns water into wine. I don't know if anybody else has picked that up, but I thought that was really funny. And he says how he'll feed people with a loaf of bread and two fish. The two fish archetype is reiterated blatantly in Bible context if you go back and actually pay attention to that. So when you think about the crucifixion of Jesus sacrificing himself for the collective good. that is the role that sometimes Pisces archetypes in particular are they feel like they're pushed or persuaded into it, because Pisces have in general have an issue with saying no, or being conflicting or opposing people's narratives, especially if they think it'll hurt their feelings. And since Pisces in particular are always super sensitive with their emotional complex, because they have no stability, no durability, no nothing. So no standard to go off of. So they're very emotionally volatile. They project that self-projection and assume that everybody else is emotionally sensitive as well. So they hate to hurt people's feelings, and so they play off. They're not genuine about what they dislike or like, in the chance that they might be hurting somebody's feelings. So when they get stuck in this victim complex, that's their passive aggressive nature underneath. They don't feel like they want to do this. And obviously people who are more passive aggressive or timid usually get dominated by more dominating kind of personalities. And so Chiron, specifically in Pisces, is the personification of this victim martyr complex. They're so emotionally invested in the greater whole that they feel it's their place to do it, even if it goes against what they really want to do. And then we go on to more of the mercurial manifestation of Pisces. So we're thinking about like communication, narration, expression, language, the way that people will articulate or discuss ideas within this time frame between the 25th of February to the 13th of March. Victim narratives. So obviously it's been a theme with that Neptune and Pisces opposition, Jupiter and Virgo that happened. That triggered a lot of the victim narrative. People feeling they need to be the advocate for supposed victims that has nothing to do with them. Like other white people telling white people that they're racist. And there's, I just don't get it. Or, for example, the Dakota pipeline. I'm not going to get into a huge argument about this, but if you actually do your research, the pipeline's actually not being installed or any of the construction going on anywhere within any of the reservations. It's completely outside of the reservation boundaries. So there is actually no justified reason for why there is some sort of protest going on. In fact, the one that they would be putting in would be safer and more efficient than the one that already exists in the same place that has a potential for having some sort of faulty issues or leaking. So not only could they install a new one, but they could potentially reinforce the old structure of the other one to avoid any kind of spills or pollution. That's kind of what I'm talking about with the whole victim martyrdom sort of thing. So the victim narrative is going to be a continuing theme. Passive-aggressive dialogue and interactions. Obviously, I already covered that. Pisces has difficulty saying no. Facade of cooperation. So rejection threshold is very intense, just like with Cancers. So they don't like no. It hurts their feelings. They feel rejected. So they project that, and they don't like to say no to other people. Therefore, when someone comes along and asks them, would you be interested in contributing to this? Can you promise me that you'll do this? They usually will say yes, or at least make it seem like they support the idea or they're agreeing to it. Sometimes they initially wanted to, and then sometimes they had no intentions from the get-go of fulfilling or following through with anything that they're agreed upon. And because of their delusional perception and perspective, they actually a lot of times secretly feel that that person was asking too much of them, therefore they justify lying. That's the personality conflict thing. In their mind, they justify, because replacing, thoughts with feelings, lying or deceiving people because that person was asking too much of them and couldn't possibly be more sympathetic like they are. They'll make promises they never intend to fulfill. I already said that. Volunteer to help with no intentions of contributing, false promises, and then Mercury and Pisces associations: irrational, illusionary, deceptive, plugged into universal energies. So that's supposed to be more of the Neptunian sort of thing. And so that's more of an automatic response with your sensory adaptation, and you just absorbing your environment. Mercury does not operate on that kind of wavelength. So looking at more of the bigger picture is not a mercurial thing. Mercurial thing is supposed to be tedious and sift through details. And then it's Jupiter and Neptune that reveal the bigger picture. We have the chameleon type, so that's Pisces being able to put their self in someone else's shoes. The fact that Pisces, from, obviously the evolution throughout all the signs, if you were to imagine lining up Aries to Pisces all the way through, how they're supposed to perceive the other signs in the world around them. Obviously, Aries being at the front of the line, they have a tendency to, be very narrow vision, narrow-minded ahead, because they want to conquer what's ahead of them, or, they're pioneering and they want to see what's coming forward on the horizon, as opposed to some of the other signs that would be more reflective and be turning around. So Aries would have no idea about the personifications or the personalities of any of the other archetypes, because they're in the front of the line, they're already looking ahead, and that's all they see. The Pisces, being at the end of the line, got to see everybody get in line, got to absorb and watch all their interactions, everything that they did from start to finish. Pisces was able to sit there and absorb everything going on. Therefore, Pisces is able to be objective as well as mimic a lot of the other archetypes, facades, personas. So it's easy for them to put themselves in someone else's shoes. In fact, I think they're probably better at putting themselves in someone else's shoes as opposed to understanding the shoes that they're in, because having that fog, you don't really have a definitive sense of self, especially if there's any kind of Neptune or Pisces influence associated with the sun or the rising, the ascendant. That would definitely impact that substantially. Having a Mercury in Pisces too, I don't even know how you would dress yourself every morning, honestly. In fact, Mercury, the stumbling blocks or challenges, which could be translated to the fall or detriment, would be associated with speech impediments and speech or language or cognitive disorders. And I would reference my medical astrology book about that, but I have no idea where it is, and I'm not even going to go there. So, the inability to accept or absorb brutality and harsh realities. So, Pisces is idealistic. They love love. They love everything. They want unity, and they want the entire universe to be one. It's the hippie kind of personification. Jesus. They cannot process or fathom the brutalities or the concepts, specifically like going on with events transpiring because of Uranus and Aries, with the square to Pluto. They cannot process, nor will they accept that there's graphic, horrible violence and abuse going on, and that there's actually people out there that not only do these things, but then there's bystanders and or people that know about that it's going on and don't do anything out of fear for themselves or because the bystander effect phenomenon. They refuse to accept this regardless if there's evidence put right in front of them. And that, again, will cause another personality conflict within the individual, which then causes neurosis. Neurosis, or neurotic tendencies, is often found in people who have Pisces and Aquarius specifically associated personal planets. So that's Sun, Moon, Rising, Mercury, Venus, and not necessarily Mars most of the time, but it can play into that. Jupiter as well, actually, just because that has a lot to do with the ideations, and it's the polarity of Mercury, the mind. Neurosis definitely has to have some conflicts directly attributed with Mercury. So Neurosis would be people who are delusional, losing touch with reality. Essentially, if you think about it, Mercury in Pisces specifically is the astrological equivalent of neurosis. So I would not be shocked if a lot of people with that specific placement have neurotic or psychotic episodes depending on other aspects going on. Speaking of psychotic episodes too, I'm not trying to jump into the transit thing, but that might be an issue because psychotic, as opposed to neurotic, both of them are the resulting irrational manic behavior of basically a personality conflict. Psychotic is more of a irrational, volatile, unpredictable, violent kind of destructive behavior. Neurotic is just irrational behavior in general. It doesn't have to necessarily be threatening or confrontational. The ability to accept, absorb brutal and harsh realities. Confusion leads to a complete mental shutdown, incapable of distinguishing reality from idealism. So that's just kind of emphasizing on what I was saying. So the shadow manifestation, or the negative concepts with the Pisces archetype specifically. And the only reason why I'm also highlighting this is because we have a stellium going on, obviously, because it's Pisces season, with a lot of the personal planets that are in Pisces, so these kind of themes are going to be prominent in the transit events, and they will be common in sociological environments and throughout individuals and groups, etc., etc. You can even watch for some of this stuff through social media and kind of gauge it yourself. Social media is actually a great tool to use to observe and, confirm sort of sociological and mundane trends with behavior. So the shadow is wounded martyr persona, kind of went over that already. The perceiving to be forced or victimized and sacrificed into the martyrdom, inability to have closure. They don't know when to say no. They always say yes at the wrong time. They don't know when to cauterize the wound. They don't know when to cut it off. They just bleed out. That's the manifestation with this. So they don't know when enough is enough. They have associations with lack of self-control. That's also where the addiction aspect comes into this. The fact that their cognition is diluted, they have no self-control, and they have very fragile emotional complex. They are the archetype that is prone for drug and addiction related illnesses or conditions. Drug abuse. People that are, Pisces archetypes are, heavily influenced by Pisces in their personal planets die due to drug use or drug overdoses. A lot of those shadow associations I just mentioned would be attributed to Lilith in Pisces. Just in case anybody wanted to know, I talk about Lilith a lot, so. The karmatic lessons are the lessons that a Pisces archetype is supposed to learn in general, which, again, I'll tell you why I'm getting into this here in a second, is healing others without absorbing pain or hurt from them as they help them. And then dislikes would be, so dislikes would manifest as symptoms of a dysfunctional Mercury in Pisces. Details, timelines, time constraints, reality, painful truth, hurting others' feelings. So details are going to be impossible to grasp when Mercury is in Pisces. Deadlines, timelines, time restraints are going to be pushed. People are going to be late if they aren't already. And then reality is going to be a tough one for people. Again, the whole personality conflict and their compromising of the ego because of Pisces ruling over Mercury. And then, the painful truth of hurting others' feelings. So that's going to be kind of compromised by some of the elemental energy that's going on in the transits. Other associations with Mercury and Pisces, this is more of like a mundane sort of thing. So in practical, when we're talking about money, details or bank accounts will be overlooked, not balancing your books. People will likely go overdrawn at this time. Pisces are horrible with money management, and so that kind of themes should be taken into account when you're cognitive thought processes, the ones that's supposed to be your logic and reason, are being heavily infected by Pisces. And financial disaster looms over every corner. With the stellium going on in Pisces, that's even more likely that that will happen. And the ideal victim for money scams. So, if there's ever, a beggar on the street or whatever, or somebody who has like a con story to try to get money out of you, it will always be, every time, without a doubt, the Pisces pulling out every last little dime that they have in their coin purse to give to this person because empathizing with the poor sob story that this con person was telling. And a young or undeveloped Pisces sun or someone with Mercury would cry easily, obviously being emotionally volatile, soft-hearted, inability to deal or cope with pain. That's typically why a lot of them, as a result, cope with drugs. Or unharmonious atmospheres causes emotional instability. And boy, oh boy, are we going to have a lot of emotional instability as a result because of the aspects going on. So recommend activities for people who either are trying to balance their emotional complex, or if you're one of those high-strung kind of air or fire influenced people, and you've really been thinking about maybe I should start doing, meditation or yoga or something like that, do some nature walks, some breathing or whatever. This is the great time to do that, because routine and patterns, since Mercury is associated with the 6th house of day-to-day, and make it a part of your daily routine, as opposed to any other times of the year that would be probably counterproductive to trying to calm down and channel into your Zen. So yoga, meditation, nature walks, if that was any activities of those sorts, if you were thinking about adding them to your routine, or this is a good time to do that. That's more or less the constructive advice that I can give you with this placement. So Mercury in Pisces would be dramatic dialogue, drama, confusion, inebriated kind of mental process, I've already said that, and transportation or commuting. So it would be confusion with directions, confusion with communication for, transports, deliveries, that sorts of thing. Mail would likely be made. Again, it's kind of similar to Mercury when it's retrograde. There would be some sort of overlooked details or trains of thought. Somebody might write you down directions and miss a couple turns. So things that will be impacted because of this dysfunctional manifestation of Mercury. Communication, as I said. Travel, learning, knowledge, mind, thought, reason, logic, perception, coordination. Again, I went over that with the neurological thing. Intellect, writing, speech, gossip, expression, and memory. So, memory retention is going to be awful. It'd be horrible if there's testing going on. Like, I bet you that it's always that kind of ironic, horrible things that I notice too. That like, it would just be typical of what I've seen for there to be like standardized like national testing during Mercury and Pisces time. That's horrible. So we're obviously going to be having problems with rational thought and minds, memory retention, logic, perception obviously, coordination. So specifically, well, Mars is in Aries, and it's going to be conjunct Uranus around this time as well. That is the recipe for accidents, horrific, abnormal, freak accidents, people getting maimed, losing limbs. When you throw this into the mix, essentially, if you were to throw Mercury retrograde into the mix with that, there would be a lot of vehicular accidents, deaths by, automobiles, so semis just completely demolishing people on the road, pedestrians being splattered everywhere. That is going to also be a theme throughout this time. Then we have Mercury rules and affects the automatic processes, links to the brain, nervous system, signals of the muscles and tissues. Mercury in Pisces would be deceptive, observations, drunk state. Mercury challenges would be misunderstandings, scandal, slander, lies, hearing and speech difficulties, and gluttony. So specifically I wanted to highlight the slander, scandal, and lies because we have Lilith in Sagittarius that is going to be distorting information, perceptions, to warp or influence people's ideations or beliefs. This is going to be an opportune time for that influence to be a proactive front with how impressionable that Mercury and Pisces would be. So other associations would be intellect, vehicles, cars, I already said that, money, bills, schools, libraries, markets, banks, legal offices, public relations, journalists, journalism, postal mail, postal deliveries, drivers, and messengers. So, again, as I kind of mentioned, Mercury in Pisces is the personification of a drunk driver. So if you think of that, vehicles, public relations, drivers, messengers, there will be loss in translations, there will be deaths or significant injuries via vehicular accidents, there will be discrepancies with bank balances, money management, but yeah, so other than that, now I get into the transit thing. So, the 25th, which is this Saturday, Mercury will go into Pisces, I think in the early afternoon. Not even 2 hours later, the moon will then go into Pisces as well. So, we're not only going to have that fog with our ego, our mental cognition, but then it's going to be in sync with our emotional complex, so that over-exaggerated superego manifestation is going to be even more of a problem. Then there's actually a grand cross immutable, because with Lilith being in Sagittarius in first degree, it's down at the bottom of the IC, and then we have obviously the MC there, and then we have the North Node on the other side in Virgo. So we're actually going to be having a grand cross alignment at this time frame when the moon is going into Pisces, conjuncting Mercury and then soon the Sun. And then keep in mind too the overwhelming influence of Pisces or water. So we have Chiron, Pallas, Neptune, the Sun, the South Node retrograde, the Moon, and Mercury all in Pisces. So in transit events in past years, when there's a stellium like that in Pisces, and they go into specific houses like the third house of transportation, the ninth house of long distance travel, or specifically when Mercury is in Pisces and it goes over potentially the ascendant line, that sort of thing, that is correlated with missing persons, some sort of unknown, unsolved mystery kind of thing with somebody's disappearance, deaths, or whatever. The Malaysian airplanes that have gone missing, an unknown account, somebody just vanishing out of nowhere. Those are attributed to this stellium in Pisces. So this has been an ongoing thing, transit-wise, with events. Neptune has been in Pisces since 2012. We have the reactivated mutable cross. There'll be a couple of grand crosses going on around this time frame, and it'll be intense, life-altering events, because that's what a grand cross represents. The fact that it's immutable, and there'll be a couple in cardinal, I believe, and it'll have Uranus involved, which is again just re-emphasizing more on the abnormality or unpredictability that could be attributed to the mutable manifestation. So it's going to be intense, life-changing, irreversible kind of themes or influences, energies going on. And while we're still in the third and final chapter of the mutable year cycle, and the fact that Lilith is part of that, that's even more concerning, and then it gets even better. So we look at the elemental balance. We have pretty much no Earth at all. We have Ceres that's in Taurus, which doesn't really do much. But she's not really going to be able to do much, especially with how much she's outnumbered in elements. Then we have the North Node in Virgo, but that being mercurial, in this instance, it's not really going to help ground anything. The fact that the nodes are also retrograde just reemphasizes that it will have no effect on grounding anything. Then we look at fire. We have 6 planets in fire: Lilith, Saturn, Venus, Mars, Uranus, and Eris. The majority of those are in Aries. And then we have, for water, we have 7 of them as the moon is in Pisces for the weekend. We have 7 of them in water, all in Pisces. And then we have obviously Jupiter in Libra, which Jupiter being a magnifying glass, over exaggerating anything it aspects with, and it every time it has an aspect with a fire influence or a planet that's in fire, it's just like putting oxygen, the fire or whatever. You're just going to exacerbate it and make it worse, and that's exactly what it's going to do. Especially since it's opposition with Uranus at this point, and Eris as well as Mars will be conjunct with Uranus during this time frame. So that's going to be pretty intense. That would cause instability, irrational, destructive, and bipolar behavior. I'm talking about that on an individual psychological level, as well as kind of a sociological theme. More volatile confrontations, fights, attacks, that sort of thing. Just random, unpredictable assaults on other people. People feeling this Aries drive with Mars, and then Eris too, and perceiving something wrong because of Mercury and Pisces, and being completely overwhelmed and consumed by their over-exuberant, super ego, and justifying violence and volatility, which would be the Uranus and Aries manifestation, for their wounded, hurt, oversensitive Piscean feelings that are perceived as thoughts. Oh, the only other thing that we have that's in Earth, obviously, I forgot, Pluto is in Capricorn. But Pluto being associated with transformation and change, it doesn't really work that well with the whole, grounding and stabilizing. So, those are all my notes on that. So the eclipse is happening on the 26th. I'll do a separate video just specifically on that because solar eclipse, so it's going to be affecting specific geographical areas, that it'll only be affecting those areas. And the unfortunate part is that this one isn't just over the Pacific Ocean this time. It's probably going to be more sociological than it's going to be environmental this time. Pisces solar eclipse on the 26th. We're going to be having mutable and cardinal grand crosses throughout this time frame while Mercury is in Pisces. We have pretty much absolutely no Earth at all in the dynamic until at least some planets start transitioning into Taurus. So everything's going to be completely ungrounded, unpredictable, unstable. People are going to be feeling even more manic and erratic. And because of the lack of clarity and perception with all this Piscean influence, people are going to be more neurotic, more delusional, schizophrenic kind of even. And they're going to be panicking and over exaggerating, dramatizing details, events, scenarios that may even be completely fabricated out of their warped perception. We have the fire and water elemental balance going on. So if you look at a natal chart for behavior, someone who has, regardless if they're the personal planets or the generational, just because of the elemental factor, when you put the elements into one little concoction, they still react the same regardless if it's on a personal level or if it's that personification of that individual on a sociological level. When you mix a lot of fire with a lot of water, you get steam, boiling water. It's hot, it's intense, it's unbearable, and sometimes it can splash up and burn you out of nowhere. And it usually doesn't look very dangerous until it finally goes up on you. So that's more of a physiological metaphor, but bipolar behavior and manic behavior, or someone who is manic depressive, borderline, is associated with an excessive amount of water and fire in a natal chart. So we have that elemental balance going on right now. I already discussed the elements with all the planets. Then we have not only the T-square still going on with Uranus, Pluto, and Jupiter, which is just exacerbating the themes that are perpetuated by Uranus-Pluto square. So the Uranus-Pluto square, even though those two planets are out of technical orb for a square aspect, because of Jupiter opposing Uranus and it magnifying things, it is within reason to look at it as a T-square. And Jupiter just exacerbating things is just going to spread the themes of Uranus-Pluto square on a global sociological level. And then on top of that, I already went over this in my Lilith and Sagittarius video, we're going to be having T-squares with Lilith in the nodes, specifically. So she's going to be essentially trying to wedge a divide to further alienate the collective, specifically, and to steer off self, the sun, whoever's attributed to the sun in this interpretation, from ascending to their intended purpose. This volatility with the solar eclipse, more of a freezing of the energy and time, to where that, regardless if it's a lunar or a solar in this case, where that energy is perpetuated throughout the themes from at least a 6 months to even 18 months duration of that exact residual energy pattern inflicting or affecting all transit events. So a lot of the things that I touched on in my Lilith and Sagittarius video with the volatility on a sociological level, it's going to continue to be like that, and it's going to be very intense. And I have been doing some research on the next Pluto revolution for the United States, the next synchronistic civil war that's supposed to eventually happen. I mean, give or take, it's not going to be exact. We're essentially in the early stages, the sociological volatility and polarization for the next civil war, and that's pretty much in a nutshell what the eclipse is going to emphasize as well. And the fact that this kind of foggy, irrational mentality is going to be perpetuated for at least the rest of this year, if not into some of next year, explains a lot of why everything confrontation-wise is going to escalate and get substantially worse. So that's my video. Wow, and it's an hour long. I don't even know. Yeah, I'm not going to cut this down. I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it. It's not going to get any shorter than this, and it's never going to get as thorough as this, too. I really combated the Mercury and Pisces influence with losing information or not being thorough. I kicked that ass. Alright, I'm done.